some people don't just ignore warnings. They argue with them, push past them, or assume the rules don't apply to them. Today's episode looks at cases where that kind of Karen energy turned everyday situations into fatal mistakes. These are the dumbest ways Karens died. It was August 14, 2018, in the coastal town of Pacifica, California. A warm, late morning with steady waves and light wind along the shoreline. Weekend crowds filled the beach, and a small local cable crew collected background footage for a lifestyle segment, wide shots of surfers, vendors, and swimmers moving in the water. One of the beachgoers was 42-year-old Melissa Davenport, familiar to regulars for her habit of correcting strangers and challenging staff. She worked as a freelance event planner, and neighbors said she often carried that assertive attitude everywhere she went. Weighing around 240 pounds, she used a wide, soft-top longboard for stability, since she wasn't an experienced surfer. Earlier that morning, witnesses said she was already paddling beyond the beginner zone, speaking loudly about how she understood the water better than the staff monitoring conditions. Regular surfers noted she'd been warned repeatedly about the breakwater currents on past visits, but she brushed off every caution as unnecessary advice meant for inexperienced riders. Lifeguards had issued early warnings about a strong side current pushing toward the old breakwater at the north end. One guard approached Melissa as she dragged her board toward the water, reminding her to stay within the main swim zone. Melissa immediately raised her voice, insisting the warnings were exaggerated and that she was not some beginner needing constant supervision. When the guard pointed out that her ankle leash was loose, she dismissed him, saying it felt restrictive and she would adjust it later. That looseness left extra slack in the cord, which later allowed the board to drift just far enough for the leash to snap tight with force. The cable crew's roaming camera briefly captured Melissa walking into the surf, while making comments to nearby swimmers about lifeguards power tripping. She paddled past the first breaking waves, continuing to talk loudly about how people exaggerate currents to scare tourists. The current pushed her steadily northward, but she ignored repeated gestures from the lifeguard tower to angle back toward the center. She tried to stand, but the front edge of her board dipped under the surface. The board tilted forward, and she fell off. Witnesses said she attempted to surface immediately, but the side current had already pushed her board toward the submerged rocks near the breakwater. According to several beachgoers, Melissa surfaced once, coughing, with her arms moving toward the board. As the current pushed the longboard into the rocks, the leash reached full tension. Witnesses said they saw her body jerk downward when the stretched leash pulled her underwater. People on the breakwater reported hearing her yell moments before the current rotated her sideways. A small retreating wave pulled her in the direction of the rocks again, and her head lifted above the water only briefly. Footage from the cable crew's distant camera later confirmed that the longboard had drifted into the breakwater, its nose catching on a submerged lip of stone. The board stayed wedged at an angle while the current continued to push water past it. A few seconds later, beachgoers closest to the breakwater reported hearing a single dull impact, consistent with her head striking one of the submerged stone surfaces beneath the chop. Lifeguards went in immediately, with one calling for backup as the other swam toward her. A brief lull in the current allowed them to pull her to shore, but she showed no movement when they lifted her above the waterline. CPR began right away, and beach staff cleared the area. EMTs arrived about 5 minutes after the emergency call and took over the resuscitation efforts, continuing CPR while assessing her condition. Their work lasted only a short time before they signaled to stop. Officials later confirmed that Melissa Davenport died from blunt head trauma, consistent with striking submerged rock after the tightened leash pulled her into the breakwater. Footage from the cable crew helped verify the sequence of events and her earlier disregard of warnings. The town later expanded its current zone markers and updated safety briefings, citing the case as a preventable incident. It was February 11, 2018, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Dayton, Ohio. The sky was gray, the air cool, and residents were casually setting up tables for the community garage sale. Most people sorted boxes slowly, greeting neighbors and arranging items along their driveways without hurry. One of the participants was 46-year-old Carla Madsen, a part-time home organizer known for treating the annual sale like a competition. Her job involved critiquing how people arranged their spaces, and neighbors said she often carried that same attitude into community events. She had already told several people she intended to run the best table this year after feeling overlooked at the last sale. So when she stepped outside and decided her driveway looked too dim, her irritation started immediately. Carla flung open her garage and dragged out plastic bins filled with old decorations and household items. When one neighbor mentioned that the lighting wouldn't matter until buyers arrived later, Carla snapped back and accused them of undermining her setup. She shifted her bins around sharply, reorganizing and reorganizing her tables while muttering complaints each time something wasn't perfectly aligned. Still unhappy, she decided the driveway needed extra lighting. Instead of buying new equipment, she pulled out a plastic storage bin filled with extension cords she had collected over the years, some frayed, some taped, and one with a several-inch strip of exposed copper wire. When a nearby resident gently suggested that a few cords looked unsafe, Carla raised her voice, insisting everything worked fine last year and refusing the offer of a spare cord. She stretched the cords across her driveway toward the outdoor outlet, but instead of laying them flat, she dragged an old metal shelving rack closer to keep them out of the walkway. The bottom of the rack was damp from overnight moisture, and several witnesses said they saw her shoving it back and forth hard enough that it scraped loudly across the concrete. One neighbor later recalled hearing her muttering angrily as she tried to wedge the cords behind it. By 9:35 a.m., 2 cords were already plugged in. The light stayed off because the final connection had not been made yet. Carla crouched down with the damaged cord, the one with the exposed copper, and braced her other hand firmly on the damp metal rack as she reached toward the outlet. A man standing on his porch directly across the street reported seeing a quick blue flash under the rack, followed by a sharp popping snap. The exposed wiring had come into contact with the wet metal surface, energizing the entire frame. Because Carla was leaning on it for support, the current traveled through the rack and directly into her body. The same witness said he saw her body go rigid before she dropped face first onto the concrete. Several residents on the block later reported a brief flicker of lights inside their homes at the same moment. People approached her driveway but stopped short, unsure if the rack or outlet was still live. Someone yelled to cut the breaker, and a neighbor ran into the garage to shut it off, sending the lights dark at once. Emergency responders arrived minutes later, and neighbors watched from the sidewalk as paramedics assessed her, though no one close by could hear the details. Inspectors later reviewed the cords, outlet, and shelving rack. They concluded that the exposed copper, the damp metal surface, and Carla's direct hand contact created a complete electrical path the moment she tried to connect the final cord. Officials confirmed that she died at the scene from cardiac arrest, caused by fatal electrocution consistent with household current under wet contact conditions. The next day, her family removed all the old electrical supplies from the garage and hired a professional to update the wiring and replace the outdoor outlet. It was May 3, 2017, in Mesa, Arizona, on a warm, clear afternoon. The grocery store's parking lot was busy, with carts moving between rows and cars shifting slowly through the front drive. Sun glare bounced off windshields, making it harder for drivers to see pedestrians stepping into the lane. One of the shoppers leaving the store was 42-year-old Dana Mullis, a medical billing clerk known in her neighborhood for arguing over small issues and demanding managers for minor problems. And that afternoon was no different. Witnesses said that inside the store she had already caused a scene over expired coupons, insisting the cashier honor them anyway, and asking for the manager twice. Several shoppers saw her leave the checkout line visibly frustrated. Dana walked toward her sedan parked in one of the closest spaces. At the same time, a compact car pulled into the stall beside hers, stopping slightly over the painted line. According to people loading groceries nearby, Dana noticed instantly and launched into complaints, waving her arms at the driver and demanding they fix how they parked. Those who witnessed it said she spoke loudly enough that several rows of shoppers turned to follow the scene. As the exchange continued, Dana stepped backward while still facing the compact car. Witnesses later said she made small, abrupt backward steps. More yelling, another step, more pointing, without looking behind her. The store's security camera showed that she moved into the drive lane at an angle, still engaged in the midst of the argument. At the same time, a pickup truck was turning through the lane toward the store exit at roughly 8 to 10 miles per hour. The driver later explained that a large SUV parked near the corner blocked his view of anyone walking out between the cars. As he turned, the truck's front fender cleared the blind spot just as Dana backed into the lane. Footage showed the driver hit the brakes immediately, but the distance was too short. The truck made contact with Dana at low speed. Witnesses estimated it looked similar to a parking lot bump, but because she was already leaning backward and unprepared, the impact spun her off balance. A shopper pushing a cart said she fell straight back, striking the back of her head on the rounded edge of the concrete curb. The sound made several people stop in place. The truck stopped immediately, and Dana remained unresponsive. A trained bystander checked her airway, while another called for help. Store staff brought a first aid kit and cleared the area. Fire department medics arrived within minutes, assessed her severe head injury, and prepared her for transport. Later that evening, authorities confirmed that Dana died from severe blunt head trauma caused by the backward fall. The medical report noted that the low-speed impact alone was not fatal, but the unbraced fall onto the curb created enough force to cause a catastrophic injury. In the weeks that followed, the store repainted crosswalk lines, added a pedestrian-only walkway in front of the main row, and posted signs reminding customers to watch for moving cars before stepping backward into the lane. It was October 9th, 2016 in Manila, Philippines, on a warm, humid evening as hotel guests stepped onto their balconies to watch the sunset over the bay. The sky was clear, the water reflected orange light, and the upper floors were filled with people taking photos of the skyline. On the 27th floor was 29-year-old Lorna Del Monte, an office worker from Quezon City, on a weekend trip with two friends. Lorna was known among people who traveled with her for pushing limits during photos, climbing railings, leaning too far, and arguing with anyone who suggested she stop. She had already been pacing in and out of the balcony, complaining loudly that the railing was ruining her angles. The balcony had standard safety features: a waist-high railing, smooth floor tiles, and a lightweight patio chair. None of it was meant for climbing, but Lorna dragged the chair toward the edge anyway. Her friends told her several times to step down, but she brushed them off, telling them to quit exaggerating. Guests on the next balcony noticed her behavior. One woman leaned over and said in a calm voice that standing on the chair wasn't safe on a high floor. Lorna immediately snapped back, raising her voice so half the floor could hear. She insisted she had every right to take photos however she wanted, adding that she paid for this balcony and could use it any way she sees fit. The visitor tried again to warn her about the wobbling chair, but Lorna cut her off, telling her to mind her own business. Her friends tried to intervene, but Lorna waved them away, saying they were ruining her shot. She climbed onto the patio chair, holding her phone outward, repeating that people needed to stop policing everything. More guests stepped onto their balconies to capture the sunset. Several noticed Lorna shifting her stance on the chair, trying to tilt her phone farther out over the rail. A guest 2 floors above later reported seeing the chair legs slide slightly, each time she leaned forward. At 5:56 p.m., the light was at its brightest, a deep orange. Lorna leaned farther over the balcony, telling her friends she needed one more photo. Witnesses on the balcony said she pushed her whole upper body past the railing, while stretching her arm outward with her phone. As she shifted her weight, the back leg of the chair slid on the smooth tile. Just an inch, her friend later said, but enough to throw off her footing. Since her upper body was already extended beyond the railing, that tiny slide pulled her center of gravity forward. The chair tipped, and her upper body went over with it. Guests on the 26th and 25th floors later reported hearing a sharp, heavy impact on the utility roof below. Several people on the pool deck looked up after hearing the same sound and notified hotel staff. From inside the room, one friend immediately called for help, while the other kept repeating that she had told Lorna to get off the chair. A guest in the neighboring room contacted emergency services after hearing the thud and seeing movement on the lower roof. Hotel security reached the utility roof within minutes and cleared the surrounding area. Lorna's friends were escorted indoors while responders conducted an on-scene assessment and secured the location for emergency crews. Investigators concluded that Lorna died from multiple blunt force injuries consistent with a high-rise fall, noting the unstable chair, her position beyond the railing, and her refusal to step down as contributing factors. Staff later recovered her phone, which contained a partially framed bay photo taken seconds before the fall. Maintenance removed patio chairs from all upper-level balconies, and management added more prominent safety notices. It was June 28, 2017, at a public pool in Fairview, Washington, a small suburban city preparing for its busiest swim season. The afternoon was warm, and a steady line had formed at the entrance. Families carried towels, sunscreen, and pool toys, while the posted rules beside the gate reminded guests that outside food and drinks were not permitted past the check-in area. Standing in line with a large iced coffee was 41-year-old Denise Halbrook, known among neighbors for heated confrontations over small regulations. Residents who lived near her townhouse described her as someone who often demanded to speak to management whenever things didn't go her way. The staff at a local grocery store had previously documented disputes with her over return policies, discount limits, and parking spaces. That afternoon at the pool, her behavior followed the same pattern. As she approached the front desk, the teenage attendant repeated the policy: no outside food or drinks. Most guests either finished their drinks or tossed them. Denise didn't. Witnesses said her posture changed immediately. She raised her voice, waved her coffee cup, and argued that she'd paid too much to give it up. She compared the rule to a nearby town's pool and leaned toward the counter, pointing at the sign while criticizing it loudly. The attendant repeated the standard response, but Denise grew more agitated, questioning his authority and gesturing with the cup. When nothing changed, CCTV showed her abruptly dumping the entire drink across the check-in computer. Coffee splashed over the keyboard, ran down the cords, and the monitor flickered as the system shorted. The attendant stepped back while the lifeguard supervisor signaled for help. People in line shuffled away, unsure what she would do next. After being told police were being contacted, witnesses said Denise muttered angrily and backed away from the counter, still shouting. Security footage showed her taking several quick steps backward without looking behind her. The ground had a thin, slick layer of water from swimmers all afternoon. According to bystanders, her heel slipped the moment it touched the wet patch. One person reported seeing her arm jerk outward as she tried to catch herself, but her momentum carried her back. CCTV captured her foot skidding, her body dropping, and her head striking the concrete edge with a loud impact. She did not move afterward. A bystander called for space while the supervisor dialed 911. Parents pulled their children aside as staff kept the walkway clear. EMTs arrived within minutes, assessed her where she fell, and witnesses said it was clear she remained unresponsive throughout. Later that afternoon, officials confirmed Denise Halbrook died from severe head trauma caused by hitting the concrete. Security footage showed the entire sequence: her argument at the desk, the backward steps into a wet area, the slip, and the fatal impact. The pool added more non-slip mats and strengthened procedures for enforcing gate rules during crowded hours. It was July 18, 2015, at a county fairgrounds in central Iowa. The afternoon was warm and sticky, food stands were crowded, and people moved between games, booths, and small attractions. Near the center of the fair, volunteers set up a simple stage for a corn dog eating contest sponsored by a local diner. It was meant to be slow, friendly, and easy. One of the participants was 45-year-old Karen Halford, a part-time receptionist known in her neighborhood for arguing with staff at nearly every community event. Volunteers recognized her immediately. She had caused problems at raffles, parking areas, and even kids' craft tables. Karen often treated rules as optional and insisted she deserved exceptions whenever she showed up. At registration, the organizer, Tom, explained the simple rules. Small bites, normal pace, water as needed. It wasn't timed. It wasn't a race. Witnesses said Karen cut him off almost immediately, talking over him and saying she didn't need instructions. Several people in line stepped aside as she kept arguing, insisting she would do it her own way. When Tom handed her the waiver, Karen objected again. A volunteer later said she argued for a couple of minutes, calling the form pointless, before finally signing with quick, forceful strokes. At the table, a front-row spectator saw her drag her tray closer, despite instructions to keep everything aligned for the cable recording. When Tom reminded her, she snapped that he was targeting her and refused to move it back. At 2:03 p.m., the contest began. Most people took small bites, laughed, and talked casually. Karen did the opposite. She grabbed each corn dog near the base and took large, fast bites, barely chewing. Several spectators later said it looked like she was trying to beat everyone, even though no one else was treating it like a competition. About 2 minutes in, she reached for her third corn dog. She bit off a large piece and tilted her head back to swallow it quickly. A nearby volunteer started to remind her to slow down, but Karen waved him off without breaking rhythm. Seconds later, she began coughing. Witnesses described it as short, sharp coughs at first, more like she was trying to push the food down. Then, according to security footage reviewed later, her upper body went rigid, and her arms pulled in close to her chest. The coughing stopped altogether. She reached for her water cup but dropped it before she could drink. Spectators saw Karen stagger sideways, knocking over her tray and spilling water across the platform. 2 people with basic first aid training stepped forward. One attempted abdominal thrusts while the other tried to check if anything was visible in her mouth, but nothing changed. The obstruction did not move. EMTs arrived within minutes. Ushers moved benches to clear a path as responders came through. From the edge of the crowd, people could see EMTs continuing airway checks and performing additional thrusts, but no visible response followed. The stage was closed off, and fair staff blocked the area with temporary fencing. Food-related events were canceled for the rest of the day. Later that evening, officials confirmed that Karen Halford died from a complete airway blockage caused by a large, unchewed piece of food. Security footage showed her ignoring the safety instructions, rushing through the contest, and refusing reminders to slow down. Fair organizers removed all eating competitions from future schedules and added updated guidelines stressing slow, careful consumption at public food activities. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos.